kind of a bill that's nice and crisp. This is a little wrinkled up, so it's not a very good one, but you put it just between your fingers so that when you move your fingers just ever so slightly, it leaves. Okay. And then you put your other hand up here, get the person to hold it like Bob is, and then I'll just let go, whatever.
It bounced, right?
Danny Ongaias could catch it in the first 1/3 of the bill.
Repeatedly.
All day, forever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
With the mole at that point?
Well, we were good, yeah.
Yeah.
Because we'd go around the moles. We often didn't have enough money to buy anything from him, but we'd go over and, and he liked us and he liked what we were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And just to add a little to the mole story, we thought we couldn't afford Donovan rocker arms. He made these beautiful forged rocker arms for the exhaust, and they were always breaking, right?
Well, no, the original ones were breaking.
Yeah, but we'd polish them down and have them shot peen and do all this stuff, and they lasted pretty good, but they still broke, right? And so each time the rocker breaks, you end up heaving the blower off. So there's $1,500. The rockers cost, I think, $800. They were $100 a piece, I think. And so we thought we couldn't afford them. And after about the second time we put one in orbit because of breaking the rockers, we figured, our economics needs a little tune-up. And suddenly we could afford them. Yeah, here's the stock. The upper one is the stock. And it's a cast steel. Not iron, cast steel, I think. Might be cast iron. And this is the...
But when the stock rocker breaks, you lose the exhaust stroke. So the next time the intake opens, you got all kinds of nonsense going back to the manifold, and,
well, cylinder
it's
pressure
all
won't
over.
let it open, but it cracks open a little bit, which lights the charge in the manifold.
Right. So losing the exhaust rocker is like one of the worst things that can happen on a fuel motor.
That's what was our experience.
Mm.
Other people said that it wasn't the end of the world, but I guess our world was a little different. But anyway, it was an exact replacement. Beautiful part. Here's a nice picture of the mole. This is an early picture of the mole. He's still pretty thin here.
I always thought he was called the mole because every picture I see of him, he's squinting. But somebody told me they called him the mole because he had an entire machine shop under like his parents' house.
Yes.
Like how he got half the equipment down there is still kind of a mystery.
No, there wasn't that much equipment early on.
Oh, I thought it was a lathe and mills and all kinds of stuff, and it was in this.
No. When he got the name, he had just gotten a lathe.
Okay.
They lived on a hillside, and the house had stilts, to support the back of the house on the hill. And so when Donovan was a kid, this was told to me by one of his childhood friends at one of the Donovan Christmas parties. The mole was Ed Donovan, right? And so his dad was an accountant, Ed Donovan's dad. And the mole wanted he wasn't the mole, and Ed wanted a lathe. So his dad bought him a lathe, a small lathe, and brought it home. And the mole says, well, where are we going to put this thing? He said, well, we'll dig out underneath the house. So they, in between the posts that came down, they just dug into the hill, and they made him a workshop underneath the house. And so the other kids in the neighborhood would say the mole's in his hole or something like that. And the mole also, he had a kind of a sleepy look to him, and with a funny grin that kind of went with it. It just tied right into a mole,
Mm-hmm. Got it.
And I always thought that Danny Broussard gave him that nickname. But then after talking to the childhood friend, that's how the mole got that name. Yeah. Just a classic guy, the mole.
But a genius of a man.
Yeah.
Absolute genius.
And where would you take those things to have them done?
All over everywhere. All over LA, Los Angeles, Um, you might go to Reese Automotive in Long Beach.
No doubt a trip to Reese.
Yeah, it's usually a trip to Reese. And
And Wreath would handle for you what?
at that time, they were doing our crankshafts.
Henry
Reese was
Velasco.
Henry Velasco worked at Reese, the famous Henry Velasco.
Velasco, yes.
And Reese was a great resource for everything.
Yeah, he
everybody.
specialized in dragster parts.
And-
He had a good collection of whatever you needed, blocks, cranks.
Advice,
Yeah,
Nice.
opinion,
Credit.
and some sponsorship if you
Yeah,
needed.
credit.
for a few
Yeah.
people, sponsorships.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Oh,
anyway,
yeah.
Joe and Deli Reese, they were wonderful. And all the people that worked for them, great people. And that was true at almost wherever you went. And then, like, you have to go pick up fuel. Got to get some fuel because you never could afford a drum at that point. 5 gallons, that was the most you could come up with.
Right.
Or we could. So you go to Tony Capana's in Torrance. And anyway, just that
Or
kind of
Mickey's.
stuff.
Mickey
Later.
was our source for nitro,
Later.
$5 a gallon, as I
Yeah,
remember.
50 cents a
in-
gallon for alcohol.
in tins, and Jack Ewell and Ronnie Rapp were the counter guys there at Mickey's.
Yeah, good old drag racers.
Yeah.
So it was also a little reunion, when you go to all these places, because it was all people you raced against.
All the guys you knew on the weekend.
Yeah, and everybody's got their stories and
Yeah.
who did what to who.
Yeah, how'd you do?
Now at this stage, you're getting to we're still into the early part of '64. You said that there were things you had the basic tune-up and the basic setup, and then things started letting you know that to make a change here or there, very slight change. Did you find yourself making any changes at this point? Are you still staying with that basic setup to this point?
No, we make changes all the time, continuously. We're making changes. And we would make changes during the day at an event. But we'd have it planned out. Okay, let's take, and we'll change that nozzle this much to start with. And then based on what we see, we'll change it a little bit more. And so we would always have a parts kit ready for whatever that week's experiments. And usually it was in the fuel system. The fundamental package didn't change, but we had an overall plan of where we were going with all of this from before we even started racing our dragster. And so we were just gradually applying that, but in a way where there were no surprises, and we didn't cost ourselves round money.
Now you said that nitro fascinated you clear back into 1960. Is that
Yeah, I
correct?
started studying nitromethane in 1960 just out of interest, because we were big drag racing fans, and you go to the drag races and you watch what everybody's doing, and you go home and you realize no one out there has a clue what they're doing. Not a clue. They just
Amen.
pour the fuel in, and it blew up. Oh, well, we'll pour in less next time.
Yep.
Or somebody would have
pour in more.
Or
pour in more.
and then everybody would have some kind of great theory. Oh, well, the reason that happened was because of blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And so don't worry, pour in extra,
Yeah.
So,
And you said you would see teams come and go as a result of coming, blowing up, and then they wouldn't be back.
yeah,
Is
that was the
true?
importance of not going broke. And we'd seen that happen so many times, because every week there was, maybe at least 2 or 3 new teams.
Yeah.
In like year round.
I had partners 3 and 4 weeks running that were different.
Yeah.
And that was
So,
common
That was
stuff.
very common.
And then all new teams were very common too.
Oh.
We were talking about the components that we all had in common, either the 392 or the 354, in some cases the 300 incher. Each block had its weakness, and the 392 was the best motor to have, but they didn't have the good cylinder heads, and they had weak cylinder walls. The 354 had good strong cylinder walls, but you'd split the main webs from the web up through the camshaft. And so guys like Adams ended up putting 354 heads on the 392 and using the spacer to space up the manifold. And that when you tried to run a 392 like a 354, you usually push the wall out of it because the burn pressure is about the first 60 degrees, wouldn't you say?
Less than that.
And that was where the weakness in the wall was. And guys went to the trouble of putting block rock and trying to support the walls from the backside and stuff like that. And it was you never figured out how to do any of that until Donovan brought out the 417 with the big sleeves in the motor. That solved that problem. But we were all faced with essentially the same issues with trying to run a passenger car motor in these cars with a bunch of dynamite in them.
Yeah.
Right, except for most people have way too much compression. I mean,
Mechanical compression, yeah.
yeah, physical compression ratio, and we had very little. We tried to not talk about that because people go, "What? You got how much? The piston's how far down?"
Yeah.
And so we kind of made it where, well, maybe we're just pulling your leg, so they could give them a way to not believe it. That worked
So
out.
how much were you running?
I think I'm not sure, but it seems like we started 450 down.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
On the 392.
6.5 to 1.
Yeah.
Oh no, it's less than that.
Less
Is
than
it less
that,
than
yeah.
Uh-huh.
With a stock stroke, yeah.
It
Those
was-
guys
it was
were around
pretty-
8 to 1 for that.
or more.
Or, well, yeah.
120. 120 to 200 was pretty common in those days.
Yeah, Keith Black's combination was about 250 down. A lot of people 3/16 down, 8th down, 100 down. Some were deck high.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
my God.
Ouch.
Ouch.
Boom.
But supposedly, Bob Skinner down at Carroll Shelby's Cobra factory, where he and Lotus John, they called him, John Morton, aka Lotus John, worked. This is after Mike Sorokin quit the first time. He drove for us for a while, and he and Jimmy Crosser kind of got into it, and so Mike quit, and so we got Lotus John to drive, see if he wanted to drive the thing. He was all interested. Well, for a couple of weeks he was interested, and then he lost interest, but he went back to sports car racing. But anyway, here's Lotus John on a skateboard. This is Bob Skinner up here on the left, on your left, and next to it is Tim Marshall, the photographer, and Tim must be 17 years old
He
in
looks
this
young.
picture.
He looks young.
A young Tim Marshall.
In John Morton's book, he describes driving the Surfmobile that he got a layout of the throttle and the brake and the parachute and all this thing, and we're going to start the car and you're going to make a pass. And he didn't anticipate it was going to be a big deal till the motor started. And then he's sitting on the line waiting for the tree to come down, and his legs shaking so bad he can barely hold the clutch in, and he lets the clutch out, and the thing pulls really hard. And the first pass, he didn't make a full pass, and then he came back around again, and on the second pass, he legged it through. And he said it was quite an experience to sit behind a blown fuel Chrysler. It wasn't quite what he expected it to be. I think it was a little bit more. But he's another important part of the surfer history.
And the car at that point would only go 180 miles an hour, and John went 180 on the second run. And he was mad at himself for lifting on the first one just because it kind of panicked him a little bit. But anyway, I think he got down there and there was no place to turn. It was over and he was ready to go into turn one, and he got bored and went back to sports car racing. He drove it 2 weekends.